towards the one, the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty, the only being, united with all the illuminated souls who form the embodiment of the Master, the Spirit of guidance. I think y'all are entirely right. I called it a Sufi 101, which is a wrong word for it, wrong phrase for it, wrong title for it. I'm really wanting to provide an opportunity to answer questions that we all have, or provide some options for how to speak about things that are impossible to speak about. That we're trying to define and describe parameters for a tradition of wisdom teachings that have been keeping humanity company for as long as humanity has existed. So how do you describe that? I don't know. And we do call it Sufism. And then we have to try to describe and define what that word means and why do we call it anything at all. Mostly the reason I call it Sufism is because that's the word Murshid used for it. And I put a great deal of confidence in him. And because his way of describing things and teaching and guiding and encouraging and structuring this vast school of wisdom into ways that were accessible and useful for everyday people in everyday life. That was really his intention through his work. And as many of you mentioned during our check-ins today, there are so many things about that are trying to help us in our humanness to be effective in the world, to have a feeling of stability, of confidence, of access to the spirit of guidance. That's the phrase he used for it. The wisdom, the guiding light that is available to every single human being all the time without intermediary. That we don't need anyone to introduce us or teach us the spirit of guidance. It's available to all of us. And at the same time, so much of what we end up describing about Sufism is contradictory, that we go, yes, we all have the direct experience, the direct access to the spirit of guidance, to our own God ideal, to the divine beloved that is available within us and all around us all the time. And we also benefit from companionship along the way, from guidance in human form through the relationship with teachers and fellow murids, fellow seekers. And so we have opportunity and structures and systems of engagement to facilitate those relationships and to make those resources available to us, to the extent that any of us wish to avail ourselves of those resources. So maybe we're somewhere between Sufi preschool, Sufi kindergarten, and Sufi 101. Who knows? And we're all over the place all the time. As far as I'm concerned, all of us are on the first step of the journey all the time. That we have the place where we are in this moment, each of us individually, perfectly. And we have the first step from this moment from this place. And it's unique for each of us, and it is leading all of us to the same goal by whatever names and forms are useful for each of us. I think in our last conversation, I spoke quite a bit about the 4 Sufi orders that Piro Murshid Inayat Khan was trained in. And today, at least one of you mentioned the Chishtiya order in particular, and which is the primary order that Murshid was affiliated with, but not the only one. And I think that his background of being trained in a few different Sufi orders and also having a lifelong pursuit of wisdom in whatever faith traditions and contexts he could find it, created this atmosphere of a home base for us today that is welcoming, inclusive, and that encourages all of us to, in the words of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings upon him, to pursue wisdom unto China. That is, we are encouraged to gather knowledge and learn and develop our understanding and our foundation of wisdom in every way that it's available to us, in every way that our hearts and our minds are pulled and interested and nourished and inspired. So my teacher, who I love, talks about Sufism being like this vast umbrella, like a big canopy where you can go as far as you want in any direction without needing to leave the canopy, without needing to leave that welcoming, nourishing sense of home. So the relationship between the Sufi lineage, the Sufi tradition of Piro Murshid Inayat Khan, alongside, in relationship with, compared to, in friendship with all of the possible expressions of Sufism, it's really mind-boggling. There are so many different Sufi orders, Sufi traditions, Sufi schools of training, of spiritual practice, of the systems of relationship. And you would be hard-pressed to find any specific teaching or practice that is universally the same throughout all of the different orders and expressions of Sufism. Good luck. I think I spoke about this quite a lot last month as well. Almost all Sufi orders that currently exist that call themselves Sufi, almost all of them are in some way related to Islam. The orders that trace their root inspiration to Inayat Khan are pretty unique in that we do not consider ourselves particularly affiliated with any organized faith tradition. We are inclusive of, respectful of, tolerant and loving toward all, without exception and without exclusion. And there is no faith tradition that is held as more important, more true, more holy, more right than any others. That every faith tradition that is useful for nourishing the heart and awakening the soul for any individual is exactly perfect for that individual. And that is the attitude and the fundamental value that is central to the teachings and the lineages that trace their inspiration to the guidance of Piro Murshid Inayat Khan. Even within that, Inayat Khan and the Sufism that he was teaching continue to blossom and express themselves in a lot of different forms and orders with different emphasis on different teachings and practices and systems of training. And they're even within the loving home umbrella of Piro Murshid Inayat Khan's Sufi teachings, there's a lot of variety. I was just reading some of his teachings where he says, Sufism is Islam in that it is focused on complete loving surrender to the divine beloved. Also, before you grab onto that and put a period on the end of that sentence, also, Sufism is Buddhism in that it is completely focused on the pursuit of wisdom and philosophy and training the mind and the consciousness toward equanimity, balance, and compassion. Also, before you go putting a period on the end of that sentence, Sufism is Christianity in that. Now, I could do this with everything. You can say, and Murshid did, not with everything, but he went through several different faith traditions saying, is Sufism Islam? Yes. Is Sufism Buddhism? Yes. Is Sufism Christianity? Yes. Is Sufism Judaism? Yes. Is Sufism Vedantic? Yes. Is Sufism also atheist? Yes. Is Sufism woven into, included in every faith tradition that has ever existed? Yes. So he says, if anyone goes to you, if you identify, if you say, I am a Sufi, and if someone comes to you and says, so are you Christian? You say yes, rather than no, because you recognize the divine light, the perfection, the beauty, the wisdom of the beloved in every form without distinction, because you're not confused by the outer forms. That Sufis are free from forms and also are free to utilize any forms that they feel are useful and encouraging, inspiring, that you can recognize the beauty of the forms without being tricked into thinking that it's about the forms. Okay. Is any of that useful? Probably not. Let's see if I can say something else for 1.5 more minutes before I pause this thing again. An important thing about Sufism is that this is according to Murshid's teachings, and I agree with this. We're not interested in erasing the forms or trying to blur all of the lines or say that everything is the same. It is not. Murshid compared it to saying that everything is the same is like wanting to take all of the notes, all of the keys on a piano and tune them all to the same note. That's very boring. That's very boring. That we want to be able to celebrate and enjoy all the notes and the combinations of them and the relationships between them, and to find and celebrate the harmony and the beauty that is possible through all of these different expressions. So every religion, every spiritual path, And every individual human being is a unique note. And each of those notes needs to be tuned to the right pitch so that it is in harmony with itself and with the symphony of life. Every one of us can be and should be tuned to the right pitch for our own soul and for our own divine purpose in life. Okay, so a few questions, follow-up things, inquiries, and first, because this theme about the heart and the head shows up a lot. And in our human conditioning, our societal structures and instruction, we put a lot of confidence on the intellect. We put a lot of trust and a lot of emphasis on the workings of the mind and the information we can gather and the ways that we can understand things and analytically, which is wonderful. And as several of you have been experiencing and describing, there's a limit to how satisfying that is. And there's nothing wrong with learning things. And for those who are inclined toward scholarly pursuits and reading and gathering information, that's fantastic. Please keep that up to whatever extent is interesting, useful, and naturally engaging for you. Whatever it is that grabs our attention and pulls us to our own highest evolution, use what you've got and use the skills and interests and approaches that work for you. Same as in the different branches of yoga, right? You can hear about this in other places and be like, right, like some of us really utilize the mind as our greatest tool in our development. Others do not. And, or some of us utilize the mind to a great extent, and then we reach the limits of that as effective or nourishing, where we go, I'm still learning things, I'm still interested, but it's not as satisfying, or there's more that I'm missing that I'm not finding through my mind and books and study. Murshid said, and I love this, the heart and the mind are the same thing. He says, the mind is the surface of the heart, and the heart is the depth of the mind. You can look at either side you want, but it is the same organ. It is the same thing, functioning in different ways. When we feel that the functions of the mind, which is the surface aspect, are no longer nourishing or are not nourishing enough, then we want to move our attention more toward the heart, toward the feeling sense. Not by cutting it off or trying to draw a line between that and the mind. We want to have a fullness of experience with all of the faculties available to us. So how much information do you need? None. Unless you want it, then you need some. Unless that's all you want, then you need all. But it's not because there's any particular book learning or information that will help the soul arrive at its destination. Murshid compares that one to seeing music written on a page that you can study, you can read it, you can understand it in some way, but the real experiential benefit and joy of it comes from actually hearing the music. He also describes it as seeing a recipe written in a book that will never satisfy the body, that you need to actually make the dish, put the ingredients together, and then you also need to eat it, and then you also need to share it with people. Because the ultimate joy comes from not just the experience, but the sharing of the experience. There is no study required. Murshid did a good job in his lifetime of shaping curriculum, that he gave tons of teachings and a lot of things that were published into books, into the 14 Sufi message volumes and supplementary papers and addresses to Shirags and the Gitas, Sangatas, Sangitas, and like all kinds of things. He gave so much material that was organized into curriculum. And that is not a typical Sufi tradition. The typical Sufi tradition is more like someone who is interested in the pursuit of knowledge and the practices and the wisdom available in the Sufi traditions. They seek out a teacher. A student, a seeker, looks for a teacher and finds the individual human being that embodies the wisdom, that carries the light of realization, that has the experience, the knowledge, and the magnetism. That's the word that Murshid uses for it, the magnetism that appeals to the soul of the student. And when the student finds the teacher, which can include a community of fellow students, but it can also be just the teacher, then the student places him, herself under the guidance of a teacher. That's the tradition. In Murshid's time, 100 years ago, when he was teaching, he was trying to package the wisdom body of Sufism in a way that could be held and developed and shared forth for generations to come. So he put curriculum together that some teachers today utilize as a system, but that's not the norm. The norm is for someone to place themselves in the community, in the atmosphere of the wisdom teachings through human beings, and to practice.